Hello, everybody. It's Tara Boothby, Soldier in Psychology and Conversations for Restoration. We're with Mo Thomas, and his background might be deceiving because he just told me he's in Michigan, but it looks like you're somewhere otherworldly right now. I'm not quite
Something
sure.
like that. Yes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, so glad to meet with you, Mo. And Mo, what I'm really curious about is Mo and I are both sort of like in the realm of science and theory and all these things. So maybe Mo, like, could you just fill people in a little bit about who you are and what you're passionate about?
Sure. Yeah. I'll go back a long way back and then I'll quickly run to what got me to this present moment. So I grew up in a really small town in near Chicago, Illinois, and went to a very strict Baptist school from kindergarten through high school. Same with church, same with home. So I really got steeped in the fundamentalist evangelical message, and I was very passionate about all of it. Always had questions, but never felt the permission to ask them. So I went the route of overperforming because I thought that was what would make me acceptable before God and before my peers, parents, peers, teachers, all of that. So my implication of that fundamentalist upbringing was I became an overachiever, relied on performance. So valedictorian in my high school class president, MVP of the basketball team, tennis team, overperformed in music, won piano competitions, all of that. But what I never realized was underneath all that, I was just a scared, insecure little kid and scared of what people thought. And so, in order for them never to see the real me, I just overperformed and thought that was my identity. And so I went through college, joined staff at InterVarsity, and then started teaching Bible studies and small groups when I moved to Michigan. Um, Started working in the auto industry as an engineer for General Motors. And between Ford and GM, I've worked in the engineering field for over 30 years.
Wow.
So that kind of is the mindset I bring to life and certainly to theology as well. I like the structure. I like to dive deep. Love the research aspect. Um, and the other part that I set aside was that inner child, creative, spontaneous. Don't think about it, just do. That was there. It was very spontaneous growing up. I learned to bury all of that. So I think it was 2006, the last weekend in January 2006. A lot of things in life, collision courses of a bunch of different things. I jettisoned my faith. That was when I said, I've had enough. I've done all of these things for you, God, and you did not show up. And so I don't need it anymore. I am walking away. So without people knowing, because I still put on the show, I still went to church, did the thing, but inside I was done with my childhood Christianity. Um, the joy of my life is that God, in their infinite wisdom, started sprinkling clues throughout the cosmos in areas where I really found my passion, which was astronomy. I loved black holes, and that kind of led me into quantum physics. And as I started picking up the breadcrumbs on that path, ultimately that's what brought me back to a sense of faith. Much was reframed, much had to be stripped away. But I think those clues in the cosmos showed me a very different portrait of God and of the world and of myself than the one I grew up with. And at the heart of it, at the heart of all of it was love. Love
Yeah.
was the force at the center of all things. And I knew that from a distance all growing up. Um, I was immersed into it as a result of leaving it and being drawn back. And I'll be eternally grateful for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Wow, that
think that's really what defines my love is now science is not just a discipline. Science is what God used to draw me back to faith.
that's amazing. Okay, there's so many things that I'd like to ask you about. And it too, so often in these conversations, the pain of many of us is we somehow became over functioners, over performers, and then got to a place where we were feeling very empty inside. Um, and so you noticed something in 2006. You just had there was something that one of the words you used and was crash. So you had some sort of like spiritual crash, emotional crash,
All of the above.
all of the above.
I had um, up until that point, I had really built my life on a set of foundational um, foundational things like my work, my marriage, finances. It was the good life. It was the model of the good life I was sold growing up. And one by one, each of those pillars uh, was taken away, was taken out from under me one by one. And I kept trying to hang on. And at some point, I didn't have what it took to hang on. So I, my foundations crashed and then me along with it.
Mm.
And so all the things that I had identified with prior to that point, all of a sudden shattered, splattered, all of it. Nothing was left. And I asked God if God existed even at that point, a very audacious question. I said, I want to start from scratch, put me in front of a whiteboard. I want to pretend like I don't know anything about anything. I want to start from scratch. I want you to teach me about reality. That was my request. And outer space was where that question took me. And so that's my backdrop now. There's something, it's almost an affectionate acknowledgement. It's an honor uh, that God in the cosmos spoke to me more clearly and more eloquently in a more compelling way than God in church or God in the scriptures. It was God in the cosmos. Then I was led back to church and the scriptures with a reframed view, and things started to open up in a way that they hadn't before.
That's so interesting. It fascinates me when I hear people talking about the cosmic revelation of God. It feels same but different, like foreign to me in some ways. And yet I really dove into the inner cosmos. Like it was through psychology and understanding the nature of our inner working model. But you're like in the outer working model. And you said earlier that your big first passion was these black holes. So I mean, like, what does that mean? What
Yeah,
gets a guy
yeah.
curious about black holes?
Um, it's fascinating because I had heard about black holes, but mostly when I watched shows like Star Trek, it was a science fiction concept, not really related to anything in reality. Um, Back when my son was small, um, he and I went to a planetarium show in Chicago, and the show was about black holes. And I remember being utterly fascinated with what I saw. I knew I didn't understand, but I wanted to know more. And so I dove deep. And um, so let me give you the Cliff Notes version. Um, so at the end of the life of a star, the energy pulling a star outward, which is its light, is balanced by the gravity of the star, keeping it in place, keeping it in shape. And so those two forces balance each other out. At the end of a star's life, when its energy outward starts running out, if the conditions are just right and the star is big enough, it goes supernova and it explodes. Well, in some cases, instead of exploding outward, it implodes inward. And so all of the mass that was previously in this incredibly large star, millions and millions of times the mass of our sun, for example, implodes down to a dot. So all of that mass is contained in this dot, and around it becomes what we know as a black hole, because the gravitational pull, imagine the gravity around something a million times the mass of our sun.
Mm.
So that would be billions of times the gravity of what we have here on Earth. That is all pulling towards this center point, which we call the singularity. So in a very real sense, the universe functions as this giant entity, this giant existence began with what science calls a singularity, and Paul in Colossians calls Christ.
Mm.
All things were created, were held together, and sustained in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 13.8 billion years ago, all of that was contained in this singularity. And then when the command was issued, let there be, what started to form is the world as we know it. So I think my discovery of the cosmos out there led me to quantum physics, which is the study of the very small. It's our inner universe. So this became that. And what happened in the singularity that was then later expressed as the universe as we now know it, there's a reference point where our connection with God and our connection with each other, and maybe most importantly, our relationship with our true self.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have subconscious memories of that pre-creation experience with God, with each other, with our true self in spirit form prior to Genesis 1:1. That's why I think black holes have become such a fascinating thing, because you overlay that on the scriptural narrative and you have the beginning, we are all one. You have Genesis 3, where we introduce this lie called separation, and we see how that plays out. Then we have the entry of this figure coming from God as a man to speak our language, showing us our origin, our true origin. You are one. Just as the Father and I are one, you are one. And your birthplace, your physical birthplace, isn't what defines you. That's not your identity. That's your egoic identity. But if you go further back than that, your true family of origin, you'll discover your oneness. You'll experience what it means to be immersed in love, immersed in unconditional peace that passeth all understanding, all of those things. Something in our deepest spirit has experienced that. My take is all of life is a parable helping us come back to the memory and the experience of what all of us have buried in our subconscious.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's you're talking about mystery, like leaning into the mystery. So you're not, when you just were curious about the cosmos and black holes, you weren't performing. You were just like nerding out, hanging out,
Yeah.
thinking about the cosmos, and somehow that drew you further into a better truth about I mean the things that are of love's kind, the restoration to where we actually always have belonged. So it's just it is mysterious and curious to think about how this occurred for you, Mo.
It really is an amazing thing. I'm going to introduce a phrase to you.
Sure.
Spaghettification. Spaghettification is a fascinating aspect, and it reminds me of how you describe love energy, which is the driving force between human connections, right? The importance of nurturing and balancing this energy and maybe taking it back to the shaping mechanisms early in our life. So black holes are the gravitational field around this dot, this singularity. If you imagine around that, there's this point of no return, and that's called the event horizon. So basically, if you have a black hole and you cross this event horizon, there is no turning back. You are headed into the center of that black hole. Well, as soon as you cross that point of no return, something starts to happen called spaghettification, which, just like a spaghetti machine, when you start cranking that thing and the pasta just turns into long strips, spaghettification is just the dismantling of all that is this physical you. And so in 2012, I had this mystical experience where I was forcibly taken into a black hole, crossing this event horizon, and I found myself in the middle of a spaghettification. Not just my physical body, but also my soul, my thoughts, my emotions, my experiences, my beliefs, all of that. Somehow I sensed all of that being stripped away until all that was left was spirit on the other side of that singularity. No one knows. No one knows what's on the other side of that singularity. And so spaghettification now, when I think of the word, it's the stripping away of all of our false man-made identities that keep us from the experience of our true self, the one before we came into existence on this planet as a physical form. So our form changed, but our essence remains spirit. And I had the wonderful experience of traveling through this black hole to the other side of the singularity where all was spirit, where all was oneness, and God and all of the spirits that composed existence were one. It was like a garden. I saw it as a garden of delight. My God is garden of delight. And so all of us sort of grow up from God and our expressions uniquely of God. And then when we show up on the planet, we retain that same essence, but now we all are given physical forms to travel through as we walk the planet. So,
Wow.
yeah, I think spaghettification reminds me of the discovery of love energy and the shaping mechanisms that from birth onward, maybe even in the womb, start telling us about who we are, contrary to what God has always known. And we've experienced in our spirit, but we've forgotten. It's
I
been
love
buried.
that. That's amazing. I love that. I've never heard that term before, but it's like, well, what you and I did, real deconstruction is how you and I kind of went into science. We brought other ologies into our theology.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is the really what true philosophical deconstruction is. But what I hear you saying is in the space of science, and you allude to this, somehow 2006, your
Yeah.
life crashed.
Yeah.
2012, so 6 years later, there is 6 years of journey, probably painful journey, to get to this place of real spaghettification, the stripping away, and this real discovery of like, I don't just want to know or study the black hole. I actually want to fall into that real experience.
You know, Tara, it's fascinating to me because I did not ask for that experience. It was given to me forcibly. And even after that, in 2012, it took several years after to process what had happened. It was unfamiliar language. I had no idea what had just happened. I saw things. that I had no reference point for. So I didn't even know how to write about them.
Mm.
So it was many years later when I started journaling about that, that more details came, and then I was able to put it in book form. And that is what I ended up writing in 2020, is about, that journey, which begins with that mystical black hole experience.
Yes. Okay. And what is the name of your book?
It's called Into the Abyss.
Hmm.
And my term for the abyss is the black hole. I
Yeah.
was I fell into a black hole, and that reframed so many things about my own upbringing and journey that I had to process. I had to know what this meant. What can I ditch it all? Are there pieces that I need to pull back in? And that it took a long time. It really took a long time. And I, at that point, did not know others were doing the same thing. I thought I was just in very heretical territory. I didn't have friends asking these questions. I didn't tell my family. So I struggled alone
Yeah.
and started being introduced to some faith communities and some online communities where people were asking these questions. And finally I had, but it was years on my own before I found that.
I know. I think that's really common. I don't know if it's still as common, but our cohort here that have been lingering in the deconstruction club for, 5+ years, a lot of us were like felt very alone. And I think too, some of it is the performing nature of the church experience that a lot of us, is more
Yeah.
common. So it was frightening for me to not perform, to start really admitting to myself, why am I not going to a physical church building? To admit to myself, maybe I don't believe in the rapture, or to admit to myself, um, something's problematic if somebody's teaching me the Bible and they don't know Hebrew or Greek. And so starting to really challenge some of those belief systems was, it felt like I was doing something wrong. But what's
Yeah.
interesting too with the black hole is, in that mystic encounter that you had, and even just in the theory and understanding the science of a black hole, the spaghettification is submission. Well, there's submission to, I have no control. Like Mo can't do the things inside of the black hole. Something
Yeah.
else.
You're surrendered completely to the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's really, that's interesting. That's a really interesting part of the freedom, I think, that I experience, um, in divine, infinite, inclusive love, is that, trusting that we're being reconciled to the place where we've always belonged, which is love. Um, we don't have to do anything. So it's like mind blowing. I don't know what it was like for you when you started to realize like my performance isn't getting me into heaven.
I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
uh, Somehow I had relied, uh, obviously, I would not have said this at the time, but I realized my whole ticket to heaven was based on what I had done, what I had believed, what I had prayed, what I had done to demonstrate it. All of it was me. I said it was God who did this, but it was really, looking back, 100% me. Um,
Yeah.
and all of that got destroyed. All of that reliance on my ego or my avatar. So I like to call our human experience our avatar. It's the us that we present to the world that we know is going to be accepted.
That's great language, avatar, because I'll say our defaults, like
Yeah.
our automatic behaviors that we develop
Hmm.
based to hide our flawed self. And so much
It's
of,
that.
yeah. And trusting that we are included in spite of ourselves is a really hard, that's part, I mean, that's a huge part of the pain for those of us who have been raised in the church is we're all imperfect, and this lie that somehow make ourselves perfect on this side so that we can get a ticket to heaven. And then the pain that we cause to those who are observing church people, because we all are, it's a facade. Um, what I think is interesting too, because you have a real heart for children. So some of the quantum physics stuff and your passion is to try and like bring it back to kids. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well, because I think that's really interesting.
My favorite author is Dr. Seuss,
Aw.
and my favorite book is The Little Prince, Antoine Saint-Exupéry, translated from the French. And I think my heart is drawn towards that work because if you can say it, whatever you're studying out here in the abstract, ethereal, scientific space, if you can write it so that it resonates with a child, you may have come close to what we might call understanding or experience of what it is you're writing about. So I love the idea of taking these concepts and almost using kids as a litmus test. Is what you're saying making sense to a child, someone with a childlike heart and view of the world? How would 7-year-old Mo receive what you're saying now? Because I think there are things that kids see and are able to observe, insights that they have, that are less filtered than our adult experience.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason Jesus kept pointing us back to the childlike heart and way of seeing things. You can't see it, you'll never enter it unless you have the eyes of a child. And so, you talk about the influences, our earliest influences, and how they shape our view of ourselves and of other people, our place in the world, all of that. Well, kids haven't started to think that way yet. They just are. They just act in unfiltered ways. The smaller they are, the more true that is. And there's something authentic about that that I have missed because I had so many masks in place and so many facades, expertly crafted facades, that I saw that kids just don't have that. Their nature is to be themselves. And then I started to see how God honors that in kids and sees all of the facades that we hide behind that actually keep us from being immersed in the love we were born from. So we
Yes.
just do this vicious thing, this cycle, and then we create a God that reinforces this unhealthy cycle that we're scared of. We create a God that we're terrified of. Um, Kids don't think that way.
Mm-hmm.
Kids know love when they see it. They trust. They are interdependent. They don't see differences that lead to conflict. They see shared spaces, color, and socioeconomic. Those don't play a role in their friendships. And so I think kids, for us, are a pointer back to the pre-creation reality with God that we have experienced. And that experience with God has also given us a memory, again, subconscious, of the dynamic that we are designed to have with ourselves, with other people, and with God.
I
So
love
I see
this.
kids as a pointer to that.
I think that's amazing, Mo. Because it's just so refreshing to hear somebody talk about noticing the miracle from a different lens. And like, yeah, through the cosmos, it's miraculous. Like to see the miracle of the black hole, or like the miracle of having a child, and creating a
Yeah.
child and holding your child. And there is this beauty in the childlike. Um, and then we damage it, so there is that, like, the ability to lean into the mystery. And it's sad to think, like, when did that get eroded away? for you or I. That's some of what we're noticing, that I was living in a place where I'd lost touch with mystery, and I
Mm,
was just trying to do everything right the way that I was supposed to, and failing and failing and failing, um until I crashed, like you were talking about too, that sense of
mm.
like. So with the children, I think it's really interesting. I share this passion with you. There's like this longing to intervene when they're still in the mystery, and how to, to try and encourage some of these little ones to stay in the mystery as well as possible as they age. Um, yeah. So, and then just to bring it back to what you were talking about, the place that we're remembering, what's interesting with EMDR, so eye movement desensitization
Yeah.
reprocessing therapy,
Yes.
we'll
Yes.
do this one protocol. It's called the early trauma protocol. And we start at preconception with people. So what's interesting is very existential. And
Mm.
this is one of my favorite therapy questions, is we ask, where were you before you were conceived? And so this powerful protocol that we can do, and then this very powerful question, and it's so existential, and the attachment story comes so alive, um, because we do have memory. I agree with you. It sounds wonky and weird, but there is
Does.
a memory preconception, and it can be erred based on our pain and trauma. People with less trauma seem to have a clearer memory of preconception. Just such a strange thing to talk about, but I've had these conversations, exactly what you're talking about.
When in your work, when do attachments start forming in the development of a child? When do we start subconsciously taking in and internalizing stimuli that become a part of the way that uh, children perceive? Is that how early on does that start to happen?
I mean, there's different schools of thought, but again, because I do this early trauma intervention and I've
Yeah.
experienced it, people have memory of the womb.
Mm,
And
hmm.
I had a colleague who did EMDR on their child with their birth story, and the child had never heard the birth story, and they told their mom the whole entire birth story.
That's
So
amazing.
it is amazing. And so I do believe that attachment is early on in utero, as the baby has senses. And there's memory. People have memory of being in the uterus. People have memory of even senses of things that were going on outside of their mother. And it's very interesting when people go through their infancy and can have memories of things, that they are, they're babies, or body sensations. And then it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
and then I had this surgery when I was 12 months because of whatever. And it's so fascinating. So yeah, I mean, that's our human attachment. And I don't love the word attachment. I honor it because it's John Bowlby's language, and then
Yeah.
Mary Ainsworth, and these are people who are really important. But Sue Johnson says love science. I think that's more accurate language.
Mm, mm,
Attachment, I kind of like noticing how the Buddhists talk about attachment. It means something
hmm.
different.
Hmm.
Um, and then like for me, there's the nature of self and the nature of others, and then the nature of God. So our view of self, view of others, and our view of God. So how does that fit within love?
Yeah.
um so self-love, love energy between people, and then love's energy. So love's energy is what you're talking about, is there is this giant mass of love that we all exist in, and that informs our view of love. And then in quantum physics, you can see this in a different way. Like you can say the same thing differently.
So the implosion of a star leads to a black hole. The reverse of that is what physicists called a white hole. That is just the content of what's in this singularity now explodes outward. And that's what I see as Genesis 1:1. So the reversal of a black hole, i.e., a white hole, is the creation of the universe. And from God's perspective, what was united, what was in union within this singularity, which means all of us, all of creation, and all of what we know as God, bound by love. It was obvious when it was all contained in a single point. It's much harder to see and experience that once we started seeing this expand in the realm of time and space, new dimensions.
Mm.
So we immediately start seeing distance between objects, distance between me and you, distance between me and God. And most of our work is to try to bring us back to the sense that we once had when we were obviously one.
Mm.
There was no other option. That's all we knew was oneness. And so I find it fascinating that our subconscious is capable of processing 11 million bits of information per second. 11 million bits. Our conscious mind is only able to process 50. So 11 million coming into our subconscious every second. 50 that we're consciously aware of. Now take that 11 million bits per second from the time you're in the womb to this present moment and think about how many stories and how many inputs and stimuli and interactions that we've had that reinforce the original deception that we live in a world of separation. Mm. Firstly, between us and God because of our sin, but then between us and everyone else because it's just so obvious that we're two separate individuals living separate lives. And even with ourselves, we have a separated mindset of the avatar, our projected version, and our true self. There's distance there. It's subconscious mostly, but it's based on the idea of distance. And then Jesus comes and says things like, I'm the vine and you are the branches. Mm. Abide in me and you'll bear much fruit. And we start thinking, maybe all of us are connected at the energetic level in ways that we just can't see unless you see with the eyes of a child. Mm-hmm. So branches on a vine, waves on an ocean. We are waves rising from the same oceanic place of love. That's where we were all, our birthplace is this ocean of love. So when I see the 11 million bits per second times our life on earth, and think about the epistemology, the stories that we tell ourselves based on those subconscious inputs, they shape our lives in such profound ways that lead to the need for things like spaghettification, mm-hmm. the work of attachment science to bring us back to a place of health and wholeness. All of these areas of study, even physical medicine, oftentimes is overcoming the implications of our base foundational belief or mindset in separation. We are unwell, we are not. So all of those things are the foundation on which our lives are built. Our self story is built.
Mm-hmm. And it's curious, because so when I deep dive into love science and attachment theory, and I'm like, this is it. I totally believe attachment theory is right.
Yeah.
I think that there are ways that we hurt children by not being bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. And then these children go on and then they come and get psychological care, or you and I have experiences like that as well, right? That we are hurt children trying to do what was right. And sometimes, parents aren't always trying to hurt their kids. I don't try to hurt my kids. My kids are going to have damage done to them because I was their mother, though. We're imperfect people. But when I realized, I'm like, oh, I totally believe in attachment theory. And I was like, this does not inform the God that I believed in. So I was like, well, if this is true, if attachment theory is true, this has to inform what I believe about God, and God has to be this good and this loving, or else this science is not true. So it's interesting when we're talking about the cosmos and black holes and quantum physics, because there's some that somehow occurred for you as well. Hey, so what does all that teach you about God? Like, what does it say God must be like this because he's the archetype that lent to the cosmos.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, God is the ultimate expression of truth, goodness,
Mm,
and beauty, and we see it in the cosmos. We see it in each other, and we see it in ourselves if we allow ourselves to make that connection. Um, so, just as one of many examples, my idea of prayer has changed quite a bit since going through a deconstruction, because my starting point was that God was distant, mostly reluctant to answer my prayers unless I was persistent enough, prayed loud enough, got a prayer chain together, all of these things. Maybe God would choose to overcome his reluctance and see fit to answer a poor guy's prayer. Now I see that God is always working in every microsecond, consistent with the love that God is in the world. Always. There is no moment where God is not acting from the place of love in the world to lead it to a place of healing and wholeness and joy and love, all of these things. We can resist that, or we can join that.
mm-hmm,
We can participate with what's already true, or we can resist it. I don't even know if we can ignore it. We can pretend that we're ignoring it, but love is always acting. God doesn't just exist as a transcendent being or existence. God is in every subatomic particle across the cosmos.
mm-hmm,
This is just another way of thinking about omnipresence. Every subatomic particle is full of the eternal God. And every subatomic particle is then always acting in accordance with love's energy
mm-hmm,
and with love itself. So our choice in the moment, and I think my times of meditation maybe just reinforce this reality that I can be caught up in and allow the current of God's love to move me into my day and change the way that I show up to my relationships, the way I show up to my work, to my writing, to my kids, all of these things. Or I can resist. I
mm-hmm,
can try to do it on my own. I can pretend that I know best. Um, and I can take on the facades that I know get me likes, or people pleasing that can come to the surface when I lose my trust in what God has done and is doing in this moment. um, but I always have the option to just close my eyes, rest, and let that current take me
mm-hmm.
into my true self.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, wow, it's just actually so awesome when you think of the things that are of love's kind and how vast love is. um and like you said, so there's this, like, God is truth and God is goodness and God is beauty. And then we have choice. So when you in 2006, when you realized you had a choice, you didn't have to lean into the choice. You didn't have to lean into that mystic experience when it happened. You could have, like, stopped yourself,
Yep.
But you consented and you submitted to this experience to have a revelation. Um, and so I think of when we're talking about God's love in the world, and it's pretty bad out there right now. Like the Americans, it's pretty terrible for you guys right now.
It's bad.
It's really, really bad. Gaza is really, really bad. So it's perfect timing for people to say, like, God is dead, God is silent, God doesn't care. And here you and I are saying something different, because God's love is here. I
Yeah.
want to move within love's kind. My neighbor may not. We have choice and we consent to love, which is very confusing for people. Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're scared often as a society when you hear about peeling back the onion or peeling back
Mm-hmm.
the layers. I think we're scared of what we'll find. We know that there's some deep dark secrets and bad things have happened, and those trauma responses are pretty powerful, and we don't want to really go there because we're afraid that when we peel it back, all that stuff is going to gush out and it's going to overwhelm us. So instead, it's easier to keep it under wraps. And I did that for decades. What I realize is that part of being crafted in the image of God, in the divine image, is that we have to help people see that at the center of that peeling is something so stunningly beautiful and divine and whole that all of the path to getting there, painful as it might be on the way, will never be the last point of that journey. There is, at the center of it, is the beauty.
Mm, yeah.
So rather than fear of what you'll find along the way, it's the discovery of not something that you're going to create that's there, it's something that you're going to find that's already there, that you're going to be able to participate in something that's already true. It's
Yeah.
just been buried by a lot of distortions, 11 million times a second since your birth, that have convinced you of a lesser story than the one that you're designed to live. And there are many pathways back there, I think, many different forms of spaghettification to help people extract their true self from all of the projected versions that they've built over the years, the facades that they've worn. That under that is something worth excavating for.
Mm-hmm.
It's so
Yeah.
worth it.
It's so worth it. And it's our pure of heartness, or, like
Yeah.
that's what William Paul Young told me. And that was hard to wrestle with. And or Virginia Satir, who I love, she's a Canadian
Hmm.
psychological theorist from the 70s. And she would say it's our I am at our deepest place, that preciousness. And so I think just right now, what I hope is that we can have empathy for the people who have forgotten their pure of heartness and are making the people who have power to make big decisions and have lost track of that pure of heart treasure. Because I did that. And that's what you're saying too. Like we get that. And it's this excavation idea. It's excavation is continual, like it's it's I believe in inclusive love, and I still sometimes get afraid that I'm not included. So I think there's a normalcy in our humanness, that all that information that's coming in, and all of the scrutinizing that we could feel about ourselves, because we're just not gonna be perfect on this side.
I also think that some of those facades are so fixed in place and hardened in place because of years of having to use them. And maybe those are heart protection mechanisms. And so our heart puts those in place in order to protect a vulnerable place. So we get so used to having those in, we just believe with all our hearts that that is us. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing under there. This is just me. Look, this is my life. And so I think empathy comes from knowing that some of those things that look so tough and so heartless from the outside are simply that person's heart covering itself in protective layers because it's trying to soften a hurt that is under there that they just don't want to touch. And I think our joy is to help people see that a lot of that pain is simply the meaning that we've attached
Mm.
to something that's been said or something that's been done by someone who didn't know. They just didn't have the tools to know how to love you in the way that your little child needed. And so those protective mechanisms are your heart's way of softening the blow. You know, you enter the world with those. Um, and that's my own story. I had those thick, crusty layers, and I didn't want to do anything with them because underneath my heart still felt like I was a scared, insecure kid who just kept disappointing people.
Mm-hmm.
What
Yep.
kind of way to show up would that be?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what if you could show up confident that you don't have to know everything? You certainly don't have to be perfect. And if you can surrender to the current, you are exposing the part of yourself that God created as the true self that we know we're designed to be in the world.
Yep.
What if really that's what life is, a parable to excavate and get to our true self and help people bring that part of themselves to their lives.
Yeah. And the mystery, like we can miss what's hidden in plain sight. And there's so much to
Yes.
take in. And so all of creation is calling out to us. So whether it's like our inner cosmos or
Yeah.
the mass cosmos that we belong to, or digging in the earth or exploring in the ocean, there's this revelation that's calling out to us all the time. And I think, like I love the metaphor of an excavation, and because you want to keep digging, and the Egypt, when they're discovering, they want to keep discovering. Or in Alberta we
Yeah.
have badlands where there's dinosaur bones. They want to keep discovering. They want to see
Yeah.
what else can we find in the earth. And just like the stars, like as I haven't spent time really nerding out with the galaxy and with all of these things, but just like so many other parts, we can just get busy and not notice. Like we don't have to pay attention to any of this. And that's some of the pain that we can see other people. And like you said, some parts are just so hardened inside of us. We don't have to see. We're not forced. We're not required to discover anything more. But we can. Like you didn't have to go into the black hole in your mystic experience.
I think when you touch on mystery, um, so for me, quantum physics has really highlighted how very little I really know about anything at all. All the things I thought were fairly certain and proof behind and Bible behind, I had all of that. And it really just got to the heart of it and, you know, started to drop seeds of very deep and profound questions that I still don't have answers to. So I think when you dive into the mystery and spend enough time there, you realize that you haven't tried to, but you have softened. You're not so staunch in your ways. You're not trying to convince people. You're looking out with them over the Grand Canyon, trying to help them see that your jaw can drop to the floor because of what's before you. You're not trying to convince them of a certain way of thinking or a doctrine. It's not a convincing, it's not an apologetics exercise. It's sharing the awe and wonder of what
Mm-hmm.
is because it's utterly beautiful. And then if you can share that, then it turns the lens to the possibility of discovering that same thing in your inner universe at the
Mm-hmm.
center if you keep looking for long enough.
Yeah.
That's what you'll see. Not
Yeah.
just see, but actually immerse and experience yourself in.
Yeah, I heard this language, somebody talking about the university within the university. And how I took that was I've had all sorts of educational experiences at this point, and a
Hmm.
lot felt very two-dimensional, which I
Hmm.
didn't know until I found the deeper, more experiential, like learning, leaning in to the mystery about
Hmm.
things. And so often we think of science as very two-dimensional. You know, you think of science class where you got a petri dish and you're going to see like an amoeba or something. And it's like, oh,
Yes.
okay, that's science. But when we actually participate in the mystery of it, you know, to see an amoeba is a fascinating mystery. And when we can lean into science in this very spiritual way, it is such a powerful pull towards our own soul and our soul's connection to the grander collective, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. You know, I don't know if you can track that in your story when you got better at seeing science as the mystery and rather than just the nerd, the nerd passion.
I think it was mostly tied to that mystical black hole experience. I think my 30 years in engineering, the skills that I had was, um, Newtonian physics, everything needed to be in order, structured. There needed to be five questions and one clear objective. And so theology for me was the same way. Everything had to be a certain way, and you just doubled down and became very certain, and then you developed a whole systematic theology around it. Um, I think that experience just blasted at the core of certainty and opened up this world of mystery where questions unanswered are far more helpful in your growth than certainty and clean pat answers, which that's what I had heard for most of my life. And I wasn't satisfied. I just didn't go far enough, I think, in putting those on the table. I didn't think I had permission to put those on the table. So I think that was maybe the permission to not just ask them, but actually follow them up and see where those questions took me. And
Mm-hmm.
it was wild. It was crazy. And hold on one second. They decided to start mowing the yard just outside our building. Let me close the window. I'll be right back.
Sure, sure.
So yeah, I think my whole basis for life, for relationships, for work was based in this idea that I needed to be certain, I needed to have it all figured out, and then I needed to double down by reinforcing that with other knowledge within the acceptable reading shelf at church or at home. But it was when I started to ask questions and then follow where they led, I did find myself in unfamiliar territory. Um, and I
Mm-hmm.
liken it to my love of flying kites when I was small. I loved flying kites, especially the kind that the stunt kites that you could get to dive and do loop de loops. I used to tie several kite strings together, rolls of kite strings together, and it would disappear up into the night sky. And one day I was flying mine, and I lost the string, and I chased it as fast as I could. I don't know how old I was, junior high, but I lost it, and pretty soon that kite just kind of spiraled and crashed and broke into many different pieces. And so I liken that now to this simple question: who or what is holding your kite string?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a grounding, then you can wander into uncharted territory. You can deep dive, you can loop de loop, you can wander into all sorts of unfamiliar airspace, start using language that's unfamiliar, meeting people that are very different than you. But that grounding allows you to do that with a sense of freedom and with a sense of peace, right? You don't have the overlay that wandering into unfamiliar territory is dangerous for your eternal soul. You're just
Yeah.
looking for truth, goodness, and beauty wherever it may show up. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, I can call that who's at the other end of your kite string. I can call that Trinity. I can call that my higher self. I can call that truth, goodness, and beauty. I feel a strong sense of groundedness from which to do all of this exploration. So maybe that's the sense of the groundedness offers us freedom to explore the mystery.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful image of the groundedness. And I've recently had some other friends talking about knowing my rootedness allows me to go into conversations in better ways to meet other people in their unmeetable places. Um, and too, it's funny because I think when I was younger, when I first studied theology 25 years ago, at Bible school, I felt the belief that I had was like I had to have the right questions. I needed to know what the right question was before I had the answer.
Mm.
And then I needed to have the right answers too. This is some of this false notion or spiritual abuse, actually. Spiritual,
Mm-hmm.
it's very spiritually abusive to believe or to teach that you should have the right questions and that you should have the right answers. But then I think of when I did my master's and when you're prepping for a thesis and the pressure to find like the right hypothesis.
Mm.
But that also is weak science. If you're going into research with an easy right question, we're limiting our discovery.
Yeah.
Like going into research with a big, bold, curious question yields to new discovery. And
That's
so
right.
you think of the kite, and I wouldn't be so courageous as to get the trick kites and do all the things, but you discovered by asking questions or being curious with the movement of the kite. That's how you learned to do the tricks as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I do think that our theology could use a really healthy dose of the mystery and the exploration of the science community. And I'm not talking about those that are um, politically motivated, for example, where there's already a hypothesis and then you just go in to prove that. True science actually goes in with a hypothesis, and when it finds evidence that changes or maybe expands on it, it willingly replaces it with a new one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it uses the evidence to ask better questions and to continue exploration. Our theology has done the exact opposite probably since the Enlightenment period. We have
Mm-hmm.
come to a theology and then we double down and reinforce it with a systematic theology. And then we build a group think around that where we're in an echo chamber. And so we only limit ourselves to voices that reinforce what we already know. It's the exact opposite, I think, of the model Jesus showed us in dealing with his systematic theology of the day.
Mm-hmm.
He asked questions in response to the questions to try to
Mm-hmm.
open them up to seeing in new ways rather than patting them on the back and saying, man, great job. You really know your Bible. He would ask questions to help them to see they really didn't know what the trajectory or the meta narrative of the scriptures was,
Yep.
which was love.
Yep. And it's interesting because both you and I, this is another sort of parallel. Like when I leaned into attachment theory, I didn't really know if I believed in love. I didn't trust that God was loving. I thought God was kind of violent, or really violent. And I didn't know if I really believed in human relationships. So I was going in just out of curiosity because something inside of me said, I I want to understand this. I want to wrap my head around this. the goal was not to have a perfect answer about God. And similar to you, I'd kind of like given up ever having an answer about God anymore. Sounds dramatic, but I think it was at that level. And it's so interesting that there's this similarity with you leaning into like the black hole and the study of quantum physics, and how that wasn't, you weren't trying to do something super spiritual.
Yeah, I think it was actually the opposite. So I had ditched all of it. I
Mm.
had walked away and didn't want anything to do with spirituality. And so science was my alternative. It was my uh, running in the opposite direction, maybe my Tarshish, my Nineveh experience. And so growing up, I had always been taught that science would take you away um, from God if you followed it to its logical conclusion. And I found the exact opposite, 180 degrees different. The further I followed through with the conclusions I was finding and the questions I was asking, God became inescapable. I
Mm.
love this by one of the founders of quantum physics, um, Nobel Prize winner back in the early 1900s. He said, um, when you take a sip, when you take your first sip from the natural sciences, you'll become an atheist. But at the bottom of the glass, God will be there waiting for you.
Oh,
And that's what I found. I took a few sips and maybe agreed for a little bit with what they had told me. I kept going, kept pursuing, kept asking questions, and I ran smack dab into the middle of the reality that I had spent so long trying to escape. And it was overwhelming and beautiful. And I I can't, some things that are so beautiful you can never unsee.
yeah.
You can never unsee. I can never unsee the beauty of the love that I was immersed in, that now I want to spend time helping others see in ways that meet them where they are. They don't have to be a nerd, quantum physicist. They don't have to talk that language. Um, that's just something I enjoy. So I'll nerd out with it. But the goal is, can a 5-year-old understand what you're trying to say? Because at the heart of it, we all have this in our memory. We all have it in our subconscious, this beautiful oneness, experiential love with God and with each other and with our true self. We
Mm-hmm.
have it. How do we gently draw that from the basement of our subconscious into the light of our conscious awareness in ways that help us
Mm.
show up as our true self in the world?
I love that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, just that, to draw our true self out of the basement and bring it up into the light of day. And I just, this has been an amazing conversation, Mo, and it's interesting. And I mean, people, if you're watching or listening, you might have to listen twice because like we had a lot of interesting philosophical and beautiful mysterious points to lean into. And so for you, Mo, I guess, so your book, people can find you've got, is it two books or just the one? You got two, right?
I, I have two. Into the Abyss is the one that I share most often because it has really the whole story of my deconstruction. The other book is called The Snow Globe, and it's written with two of my friends, both of them pastors, um, looking at the world as the analogy of a snow globe through God's perspective. What does it look like for God symbolically to hold up the world like it would a snow globe and see the connection of God in every
Wow,
particle as it gets shaken? So,
that's
uh,
cool.
yeah.
Cool. So I will put Mo's links to Mo's books and how you could connect with Mo if you want in the description below. And thank you so much, Mo. Mo and I are friends. We connected through the Rethinking God with Tacos community. There's a great Facebook group, and Jason Clark and his friends.
Yeah.
He's got lots of people involved with his podcast. It's a fun one. And then Mo and our friend Dale and some of the other friends, Bob and a few of those guys, they get together and they just hang out on Zoom a couple times a week and talk about the podcast or just chill, I think, and talk about life and spiritual things. So yeah, so thank you, Mo.
I so appreciate, honored to be with you. I love what I feel like is the overlay of spaghettification with the great work you're doing with love science. I think that's what you called it instead of attachment science, of the things that interfere with us excavating our true self and
Yes.
helping people walk down that journey in a safe space. So I really appreciate the work that you are doing to do that.
Thank you so much, Mo. And
Of
I
course.
I love I love your voice at the table. This is an important voice and it's tricky to understand. And so I think it's why it's important that you're bringing the physics lens in and that you can talk about space in a way that some of us are curious, but we just don't quite get it. So all of that is really important. Yeah, so thank you so much, Mo, and thank you everybody for hanging out with us.
Blessings. Look forward to talking again.